thanking Mariana and Ida for the invitation, and also to you for putting all these technical issues together. No? So it's really a pleasure to share these days with you. And as you can see by the title of my presentation, I will deal with the terracotta figurines of the Iberian Peninsula, dated approximately in the late Iron Age, between the 3rd and the 2nd centuries BC. But first, let me present briefly the historical context of the Iberia during this period. And as you know, the Iron Age in the Western Mediterranean is characterized by a diversity of social organizational systems marked by inequality and social hierarchy. Iberia is not an exception to this trend. During this period of time, the peninsula was partially inhabited by the so-called Iberians, a term that refers to the inhabitants of a wide area between the south of France and the upper Guadalquivir Valley, whose identification follows Hellenistic and Roman textual evidence. This population underwent a series of cultural and social changes around the 6th century BC that clearly differentiated them from the previous one. These changes were brought about both by local inhabitants and by other people of the Mediterranean, such as Phoenicians, Greeks, Punics, and Romans, with whom they came in contact. In this area, diverse social organizations with little homogeneity in economical or political terms coexisted. Iberian political entities varied from one place to another in terms of size, settlement hierarchy, rural strategies, and land occupation. Elites enjoy rich burials with monumental architecture and sculpture, structured urbanization of production, and control long-distance exchanges. This political arrangement lasts well into the 2nd century BC, when the Roman occupation of the peninsula ended the existence of indigenous polities. Some settlements were violently destroyed, and others continued to be occupied, although under new political and economic organization. As you have seen, Iberian culture is a wide topic, so I will focus on the area of the central and southern areas of the present-day País Valencià, named by the classical authors as Contestania and Edetania. Especially, the area of Contestania has been involved with Phoenician and Punic settlements from the same area, as well as other main Punic centers like Cartago Nova or the island of Ibiza. In this sense, the study of these interactions has been widely studied from different perspectives: architecture, funerary realm, and mostly through commercial exchanges. However, these interactions have not been considered in depth when studying coroplastic objects. In what follows, I will concentrate on 3 main topics. First, the analysis of the emergence of clay figurines in these areas during the 3rd century. Second, on the connection and influences with other Mediterranean cultures, mainly the Punic one. And finally, on the significance of the abundance of female imagery. Moving to the first topic, during the end of the 6th and all through the 5th and the 4th centuries BC, life-size human and animal representation loom large over Iberian landscapes. Statues and sculptures made in stone gave material visibility to the elites. These used local symbols and reflected attitudes that were shared over a large area of Southeast Iberia. Naturalistic and imaginary animals and humans, alone or forming groups, were represented. The group sculptures depict narrative scenes, namely warriors and horsemen fighting other Iberians, and also individuals facing ferocious animals. Humans included high-ranking male adults, warriors, horsemen, young women, and high-status adult women, the so-called damas or ladies, such as the famous Lady of Elche or the Lady of Baza. These ones come from cemeteries, busts of adult women and seated women featuring a hollow receptacle for the ashes of the deceased. These sculptures belonged to different social contexts. Some were displayed in heroic sanctuaries and are thought to be represented idealized individuals or groups. figures from mythology or perhaps divinities. Some others were displayed in necropolises, signaling the tombs of high status individuals, and still others were erected to mark territorial boundaries. All these representations were intended to claim rights to the landscape, to gain and legitimate power through the control of land, memories, and ancestors in an area convulsed by violence and competition of small polities. Not surprisingly, these sites were highly visible in the landscape and were located in conspicuous places, on crossroads and by main roads. Although variations occur from one region to another, and over time, these ritual places were crucial together with the settlements for the construction and maintenance of elite identities up to the 4th century. But from the 3rd century onwards, a remarkable change occurred. Life-size animal and human representations were no longer erected. Some of them were even destroyed in violent episodes of breakage, whereas others were neglected and decayed. Almost simultaneously, new human representations were scaled down and miniaturized. Although small-scale human figurines had existed well before the 3rd century, they were certainly very limited in number and were displayed only selectively in some houses. As part of these changes, representation of humans suddenly increased in number and occurred in altogether different contexts. They were deposited in territorial sanctuaries, houses, and shrines, and not anymore in cemeteries. This change has been interpreted as an ideological strategy of the elites in a new patron-client relationship, in which more people will have been granted the right to possess representational imagery in comparison to previous centuries. Interestingly enough, the figurines represented the same social groups identified in the sculptures, according to the similarity of decoration and clothing, but they differ in that they were scaled down and deposited in another social context. The former heroic sanctuaries and necropolises fell into oblivion, whereas territorial sanctuaries emerged as the new places for constructing identity under the power of the city's elites. Such is the case with the sanctuaries of La Sarreta and Tossal de San Miquel, to mention a few of best known and with the presence of clay figures. Indeed, a relevant case study, as I have chased, is the ancient site of La Serreta, a walled settlement that acts as a central place ruling over other settlements and as a hilltop sanctuary. On the highest part, remains of hundreds of terracotta figurines representing for the most part complete human bodies, heads, and other anatomical parts have been recovered without reliable contextual information. No traces of buildings have been clearly identified to date, so it is likely that they had been deposited as votive offerings in an open-air shrine. The settlement was inhabited since the 6th century BC, and according to the evidence provided by regional surveys, spatial analysis, and intra-site exploration, it became the central place of a vast political territory during the 3rd century. It was abandoned following a violent episode around the early 2nd century BC, although after the abandonment, it was still frequented as a cult center. The sample of terracottas, which is the biggest one found in Iron Age Eastern Iberia, is formed by nearly 15,000 fragments and 434 identified objects, most of them representing devotees attending to the open-air sanctuary. Female representations outnumber. 5 iconographic types have been identified based on the codes of representation of the bodies. In addition, subtypes have been defined based on gender identification and manufacturing techniques. Finally, features for each type and subtype have been defined in terms of body decoration such as hairstyle, jewelry, or veils. So the first type you can see in the right side of the slide are the so-called heads. Although no complete piece have been recorded, An ideal reconstruction by my colleagues Nacho Grau and Ivana Moros have been made based on the multiplicity of small fragments. The second type are the female head-shaped incense burners, again all identified by small bits of figurines. The third group are the figurines that we call with realistic faces. This is the most numerous group, and female images outnumber the masculine ones. The mode of production is quite complex, as 3 combined ways have been identified: wheel-made, mold-made, and handmade. First, a cylindrical torso made from a piece of rolled clay or a bell-like shaped wheel-made torso was modeled. Then, face and head were mold-made and applied to the body. And finally, the figurine will be elaborated further through other basic techniques, such as pressing into shape some parts and the addition of more pieces of clay, such as mold-made or handmade bells, jewelry, or arms. This is a standardized technique that creates a certain degree of homogeneity in the size of this group, as they are between 15 and 16 centimeters long. The fourth group is the schematic one. The manufacture technique is similar to the previous types, with a combination of wheel, mold, and hand techniques. In general, they present schematic faces where eyes are the most remarkable feature, represented whether by perforations or clay buttons. Finally, the last type of the typology are the groups. One of the groups identified is based on the so-called Mother Goddess plaque that you can see on the right side of the slide, which was found on the settlement, possibly in a cultic room and not in the shrine. It is a handmade plaque that represents diverse figurines regarding their signs and their activities. In a central position, there is an enthroned figure whose head has not been preserved, holding 2 babies in the attitude of suckling. On both sides of this figure, there are 2 other statuettes of different sizes. On the right side, they are playing the double pipe, whereas on the left side, the bigger figure presents her arm on the shoulder of the small one, probably representing a maternal relation. Finally, 2 dogs were located between the couples and the central figure, but only one of them have been preserved. Some schematic figurines from the shrine I show you on the other side of the slide appear with their arms raised as if touching another figurine. So it is probably that they were together with a smaller figurine. In addition, a group of very simple figurines without any facial trait or decoration have been defined as babies, images of babies, similar with the ones of the plate. Not by chance, they are slightly curved, indicating that originally they were placed on some other figure. Moving to the other area, the Erected territory, the situation is different regarding the terracottas because they are less significant in number. However, they present similarities with the contestant ones, not only in manufacturing techniques, but also in the iconographical types. Also remarkable is the fact that they are recorded from sanctuaries, domestic chapels, or unfortunately, without reliable stratigraphic information. Moving to the first type, heads are really well preserved. A case in point are the 5 specimens from the fortress of Puntal dels Llops, inside a room defined as a domestic chapel. They have been identified as both male and female images of ancestors. Female head-shaped incense burners are also recorded and well preserved. They are imports from other Mediterranean areas, but also we have local productions, like the one you see here of Castellet de Bernabé. Finally, there are schematic terracotta as well. They are handmade and present some painted decorations. The facial traits are also remarkable, with incisions to recreate eyes and possibly hair. The weirdest specimen is the wheel-made figurine recovered without a clear context from an inner settlement of the Valencian area, Los Villares, and this is really a unique figurine. The fast overview I just presented makes clear that this area of Iberia produces local figurines according to their body walls that seem quite complex, keeping in mind the variety of mode of production and the body decoration. In this sense, the more reliable proof to attest the local production is the clay analysis of some specimen of La Serreta that show that they were manufactured with clays of the surrounding area. It has also been attested a workshop that in Tossal de las Basas, a site on the coast of Alicante that produced, as you can see, such an impressive object like this clay boat. Also noteworthy is the mold of Bes recovered from a cemetery. But the interaction between this local terracotta and other areas of the Western Mediterranean cannot be neglected and can be traced especially through the study of schematic figurines. They are easily made, and eyes are the more remarkable feature represented whether by perforations or plate buttons. This group is the one that presents more similarities with the Punic coroplastic production of the Western Mediterranean. In fact, the first study of this corpora made during the 60s of the previous century already defined these schematic Iberian figurines such as Punic, archaic, or bear-like faces. In fact, connections with Sardinian suffering devotees are striking. Without establishing a direct relationship between Sardinia and La Serreta, I suggest that this mode of production, easily made and thus identifiable across the Mediterranean, is made according to local specificities that created particular body walls. In this sense, this type of figurines present two local features. The first is the highlight of the eyes through the addition of a coil below the eye, as you see in the slide. I argue that this adding responds to an Iberian iconographical code that highlight the gaze, and it can be also identified in the more or less contemporary painted figures on pottery. Equally, some schematic figurines are decorated with veils or mitres, following the pattern of stone sculptures of the previous centuries and the figurines with realistic faces of La Serreta. Also interesting are the wheel-made figurines or bottle-like shaped figurines, as they are crafted upside down as a proper jar, but they cannot be considered bottles or closed forks because the bases are open. In this sense, heads are usually modeled upside down too, as if jacks' necks. The top of these objects are turned into faces by modeling this upper part in trying to give a realistic face that is looking up. Another technical choice, as you can see in the pictures, is to cover the upper part by a piece of clay. In these cases, faces are triangular shaped thanks to these additions of clay, in which the artisan represented hairs, eyes, noses, and mouth. Again, the artisanal solutions are also recorded in some Punic figurines recovered from Sardinia, especially in Vitia. Another relevant point that reinforces the local body walls are the addition of feet to the realistic figurines. In fact, they are not a functional part of the object, as they do not make the figurine to be stand up. Thus, their addition may respond to a social value of feet in the rituals performed at the shrine. This is also seen in the schematic figurine on the right side, where a central digitation has been made at the center of the base, perhaps in trying to imitate or model the feet of the realistic ones. To conclude, I want to finish highlighting the relevance of female images in comparison with masculine or ungendered ones. Most women figurines present a relevant gesture. They open the veil and touch the belly. This posture is ubiquitous not only in Iberia, but also in the Mediterranean, as we have seen these days, and it has been interpreted as a request for fertility. In addition, these female figurines appear highly decorated, with the head covered either by a veil or a veil plus a mitre. As regards jewelry, earrings, necklaces, headbands, and round pieces to cover the bands of both laterals of hair indicate the importance of wearing an appropriate attire during the ritual performances. Interestingly, this look is related to a specific kind of women, high status and married. We know this because in other settlements and other supports, young women present a different corporality. They have the hair uncovered and two braids. We argue that probably this over-decoration refers to the dowry of just married young ladies. In this sense, terracotta of children does not appear isolated, but in groups, making visible that they are defined inside the family units and constitute an ungendered category because they do not present neither body decoration nor specific body traits. Thank you.